Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, I want to ask you about the Apple case as well. The facts of the San Bernardino case are obviously pretty compelling in terms of wanting to know what's on that phone, whether there were other parties involved or other plans or targets of attack. And while that application, as you've pointed out, is focused solely on that phone, when I read the a motion in support of the application under the All Writs Act, I don't see a limiting principle. And by that I mean that if that argument is accepted by the court in this case, won't it lead district attorneys and other prosecutors around the country to essentially make the same argument in their cases? And some of those may be compelling. I think you pointed to a pregnant woman who was murdered, I think in Arkansas, and the phone may be the only key to who her killer is. But nonetheless, that application may be good in misdemeanor cases involving nonviolent offenses. And so while the result may only affect this phone, the precedent will be there for many others. And I guess what I'd like to ask you is there a limiting principle here? Is there a way through negotiation that we can arrive at cases where it's appropriate to seek this relief and cases not? Do you acknowledge sort of the broader policy implications of a uniform application under the All Writs Act? Now, I realize this may be mooted by the next generation of operating system, which may not allow this kind of relief, but nonetheless, if it is technologically feasible, even with the next generation operating system, for Apple to help with the opening of a phone, it seems to me that the argument you're making in this case will apply to those new operating systems as well. So is there a limiting principle here, and is there any way to resolve this through negotiation? Because at least the initial positions of the parties are, we need access when we have legal warrant, and the other side is saying we can never provide access because if we do here, we'll have to do it everywhere.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schiff. And I should say I very much agree with the way you framed it in your opening statement. This case and all cases are very, very important, but there's a broader policy question that is far larger than any individual case that we all have to grapple with. But to the case, first, I think the answer would best come from a technical expert and a good lawyer. I'm neither of those, but I will take a shot at it. I do think that it is potentially, whatever the judge's decision is in California, and I'm sure it'll be appealed no matter how it ends up, will be instructive for other courts. And there may well be other cases that involve the same kind of phone and the same operating system. But what the experts have told me is the combination, here's where I'm going to get well out of my depth, of a 5C and this particular operating system is sufficiently unusual that it's unlikely to be a trailblazer because of technology being the limiting principle. But sure, a decision by a judge is a judge weighing a decision in Brooklyn right now. All of those decisions will guide how other courts handle similar requests. The All Writs Act, as you mentioned, is a tool that I used as a young prosecutor. We've used for hundreds of years so that can have their orders given effect, and how judges interpret that in any particular jurisdiction is not binding on others, but will be important. So I think that's fair to say. But I do think the larger question is not going to be answered in the courts and shouldn't be, because it's really about who do we want to be as a country and how do we want to govern ourselves.
Well, let me ask you about that broader policy question from the Bureau's perspective, and that is, can you live with a policy, can law enforcement live with a policy that says only in certain cases, whether they're violent crimes or other very serious cases, terrorism related, that we would allow under the All Writs Act? I mean, Congress could specify to which purposes the All Writs Act or a change to CLIA would apply. Is that something that the law enforcement community, intelligence community, you think, could negotiate with privacy stakeholders and with the technology sector?
I think conversation and negotiation is the key to resolving this. This is the hardest question I've seen in government, and it's going to require negotiation and conversation. But I've been very keen to keep the Bureau out of the policymaking business. I think we have two roles in this context. One is in the cases. We must do a competent investigation following the murder of 14 people in San Bernardino, and we will, and we'll use whatever lawful tools are available to us. But in the larger conversation, I think our role is just to make sure folks understand what are the costs associated with moving to a world of universal strong encryption. There's tons of benefits. I love encryption. I love privacy. And when I hear corporations saying, we're going to take you to a world where no one can look at your stuff, part of me thinks, that's great. I don't want anybody looking at my stuff. But then I step back and say, law enforcement, which I'm part of, really does save people's lives, rescue kids, rescue neighborhoods from terrorists, and we do that a whole lot through court orders that are search warrants, and we do it a whole lot through search warrants of mobile devices. We're going to move to a world where that is not possible anymore. The world will not end, but it'll be a different world than where we are today and where we were in 2014. And so we just have to make sure that the Bureau explains to folks what the costs are so that people don't look at us 5 years from now and say, where were you guys when this happened? This is too important to let us drift. And so my goal is to have the Bureau be a factual input so we have a really robust conversation that's well informed.
Well, thank you, Director. And I know my colleagues will have more questions, so I'm going to defer to them. There's one other matter I wanted to raise, though, and that's the subject of Libya. I'm deeply concerned that as the size of the tumor in Syria and Iraq decreases, that we're seeing a growth of a new malignancy in Libya. There seems to be a concern with taking more aggressive military action against ISIS in Libya, that it would somehow interfere with the ongoing, never-ending, it seems, negotiations to try to get the two political parties together and form a common government. From an intel perspective, do you think that we could take more aggressive military action against ISIS in parallel with the political negotiations, or do you think we have to choose between them? Because I'm concerned that at the pace of those negotiations, which seem endless, that we may get to the point where ISIS is so firmly entrenched in Libya that we have to embark on the same multi-year project that we're undertaking in Iraq and Syria.
Well, I'll start that, and then others can contribute. I think you've very aptly characterized the dilemma here is in terms of a more robust military intervention in Libya and the potential jeopardy that then poses to a very evolving political process. There's great hope for this new government of national accord. We'd like nothing better than to have a government in place in Libya with whom we could work and from whom we could gain consent for engaging militarily in Libya. That is a subject of active discussion as I speak. John, do you want to add anything to that?
I think there is recognition that there is a relationship between government building, trying to get this government of national accord off the ground, and counterterrorism operations. And the discussions that I think Jim and I and others have been in recognize that sometimes what you do in one environment affects the other. But I think the purpose is to try to pursue both with vigor simultaneously, recognizing that you cannot put off the counterterrorism operations as this long process of government building continues to take place.
Just to drill down a bit further on that, do either of the political factions that are trying to form the common government, do either of them take issue with the necessity of military action against ISIS? I'm trying to get an understanding as to why, in an effort that I hope would be more fully integrated with European military leadership, a more aggressive approach against ISIS in Libya would somehow interfere with the political negotiations.
Well, the governments the two competing governments also are, neither of them are monolithic. There are a spectrum of political views within each one of those. So I think there is, to the extent that there can be in Libya, a fair amount of agreement that ISIL poses a threat to Libya as a nation state, and I think there is sentiment among the most parties, but not all, that this represents a threat to the country. But there is not, and that's the difficulty here, there is a wide range of views in the political spectrum.